Well, thank you, Dr. Marissa. So, I wanted to share with our followers just a little bit about yourself. You started a Mom and Me PT with a mission to provide moms and babies with the support and education and individualized care they deserve, which I think is phenomenal. There's so much need for this. You're a doctor of physical therapy. You specialize in pelvic health, which I can't wait to pick your brain about, and infant physical therapy. And your expertise is facilitating the developmental milestone process. You're committed to providing care that helps to empower and allow for prompt and collaborative healing. You're passionate about spreading the truth that no, you don't have to just wait and see what happens in a few months. And no, that is not a normal symptom that you just have to accept in your postpartum body, which I love because I feel like those are complaints that I get in my office every single day.
Right? I feel like they're my motto because
Oh,
same.
I love it. So, if you can kind of elaborate a little bit about your bio, how long you've been in practice, what prompted you to start that Mom and Me PT.
Absolutely. So I started my career in pediatrics. I worked with kids first. And I think the frustration, that biggest frustration that really encouraged me to start my own practice is I used to see moms coming into the clinic with their babies. And I would just start by asking a few basic questions. When did your baby start rolling, et cetera, et cetera. And did they roll in both directions, to the right and to the left was a really common one. And almost 100% of the time, moms would say, "Oh, I never thought to look at that. I actually have no idea," which is amazing because nobody to look at that if they never knew to look for that. But it's such an important and it's an easy thing that you can keep an eye out for that actually gives us so much valuable information. So it was a lot of little things like that. Oh, I didn't know that all of that arching and stiffness was a sign of something. Oh, I didn't know that that we could help them do this thing. I kind of thought that they like were supposed to figure it out on their own. Like I didn't know that I could just move their arms like that. If I wanted their arms to be underneath them during tummy time, I didn't know that I could just hold their arms there for them. So it was a lot of these little super easy things that I was realizing weren't being taught to moms, weren't being taught to parents in general. And they are things that make such a huge difference in development. So that was really the original frustration that got me thinking, I think I want to start something where it's really education based, where it's really preventative focused, all of that good stuff. And then actually the pelvic PT and the postpartum PT kind of came next because the more you spend time with babies, the more you're talking to moms and hearing about what they're experiencing. And it was almost the same exact theme of like, oh, I didn't know that I could not pee every time I sneeze, cough, laugh. Like I didn't know that there was help out there for this problem or this problem. And I guess that lack of information and education really gets a fire lit in me because I decided to really open up that side of things next. And now I get to do both, which is amazing.
I love that. And that seems like such a natural evolution. As a mom and knowing what I know, I was a doctor for, gosh, 10 years before I became a mom. Especially for moms, you go to your post follow-up like 6 weeks out, and then you're done. And then
Mm-hmm.
for babies, you follow up within a week, and all they do is do the wellness with the vaccine schedule and the minimum, and there's no education on any of this.
Right. If anything, parents will come to their pediatrician appointments with concerns. And most often, the response that they're getting is, oh, they all at their own pace. So just wait, give it another month or two. Let's see what happens, is the most common response I get. And then what this really interesting thing happens all the time, which is then maybe they do achieve that skill a couple months late. Okay, no problem. Cool. Now we're moving along. And then the next milestone, starts to come around and it's the opposite response. Same pediatrician, same type of thing, but now it's, oh, here's this 12-month checklist that we're supposed to give you at the doctor's office. oh, they're not, pulling to stand yet. Well, that's a big problem. Why aren't they doing that? And so it's like the literal opposite thing that happened just a few months later. And I hear it all the time. It's really wild. Yeah, I would really love to see that change slowly but surely.
Yeah, and like you said, it kind of builds on each other. If they don't meet the first few, then they're delayed in other ones. And then, as you probably can testify, the further you wait, the longer the therapy is and the longer it is to catch up with those neurodevelopmental achievements. So yeah, that's the same thing
100%.
in our area. Just wait and see. Oh, well, he or she's just a slow learner or, whatever excuse they want to give.
100%. And that building kind of factor is one of my biggest passions to really talk about because, a lot of times when a baby, let's say, isn't crawling, the parents work on crawling, meaning they try to put their baby on their hands and knees. They try to encourage that crawling movement. And, like you mentioned, skills build upon each other. And there are actually some really fundamental things that are required before crawling, before talk about crawling. So a lot of times I'll go into an evaluation with, let's say, a 9 or 10 month old baby, and actually they're not even ready to start being on hands and knees. We have to work on these three kind of more foundational things first before we can even think about putting them on their hands and knees. And I think that piece, like breaking down the skills that are required for each milestone is really missed often.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you noticed any difference between babies vaginal versus C-section?
Yes and no. I think sometimes I see babies who are delivered via C-section often more stressed, like from a nervous system perspective, more upregulated. But I also see that with acid reflux, with moms who are really, extremely stressed, with environments that are super overstimulating. So there are so many factors that it's not one versus the other. But yes, I do think that there are certain trends that I notice like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up mom stress too, impacting
Yeah,
the neurological system of the child because they immediately pick up on that, how smooth or stressful the labor experience and postpartum experiences.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We talk a lot during my sessions with parents about co-regulating and soothing and kind of what the difference is when you're soothing a baby who's upset, the difference between really co-regulating with them versus distracting them with something that's more stimulating, and I actually teach parents that. And it sounds so funny, but like it really is something that so many people don't think about. And again, it's one of those things like, why would you think about it if you've never been in a situation before? But I have such a great opportunity, when I spend a full hour with people to really talk about all those little things that end up making such a huge difference because moms, by doing that, mom ends up intentionally calming their nervous system down too. And so they benefit as well.
That's true. It's that same vibration, 100%.
Right?
Yep. Do you find that when you're talking to parents too, that how large their tribe is or how big their community is impacts success with the program as well?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think one of the biggest factors that comes to mind is when you have support that allows you to keep your child, let's say, out of daycare for those first couple of years. Not that I have anything significant against daycare. I think that piece is probably a little outside of my scope of practice, but just from what I see in my perspective, if a child does need a little bit of extra guidance, let's say through physical therapy in their gross motor milestones, it's really hard to fit in that, let's call it homework, that time to really work on those things when, mom is working all day, baby's in daycare all day, and then you get maybe 1 hour with them before bedtime. So from that perspective, when you have the support where you can spend that time, or sometimes I'm teaching, the nanny, sometimes I'm teaching the babysitter, the grandmother, whoever it is that's home with that child, how to do those exercises, that makes such a huge difference for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about not enough time, really. Yeah, you
Literally.
come home, you do dinner. If you have other kids, you're chasing them around. It's bedtime, baths.
Absolutely. And then for the other perspective in terms of a tribe is I really talk a lot to when I'm speaking to a group of pregnant women, I talk a lot about their tribe in terms of having their trusted people, a physical therapist, a lactation consultant, a chiropractor, a sleep specialist, whoever those people are, who they can kind of find in their community, identify ahead of time. And then when you have a question related to any of those things, you already know who you can call. That type of tribe, I think, is priceless versus feeling like you're going to pop a question onto a Facebook thread. You know, nothing against Facebook at all or any type of social media, but the response that you're getting is going to be very different than that trusted tribe of specialists. And I think that's when moms start getting pulled in 20 different directions, and then they're overwhelmed and they don't know where to start, and they're kind of half doing 10 different things. And that becomes very hard. So, kind of having your trusted tribe of professionals, I think, is hugely underrated.
For sure. Yeah, I find a lot of moms will do that. Like they'll post to Facebook or do
Mm-hmm.
something on Instagram, and then everyone chimes in their thoughts. And then I don't want to say you get mom shamed, but you read other comments and they're like, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And then you start on supplements, you start down rabbit holes, you go to
Yes,
different specialists. You do get overwhelmed. So having a rep, not again, that it's not reputable, but a credible professional to bounce ideas off of is priceless.
exactly.
Yeah. And I love, with your program that you offer it as play therapy. We think, at least a lot of my patients that come in, they think as physical therapy as work. I'm going to spend an hour doing work, and if they don't keep up with it, they lose their gains, right? So talk how you integrate it as play therapy versus true work.
Yeah, 100%. I really believe that this things that I teach as a physical therapist don't require a significant amount of extra time. It's about making the time that you're already spending sitting on the floor with them, watching them play, making that time really count and making that time purposeful. So that's why purposeful play, is called what it is, because you're already, for the most part, spending that time. It's just about knowing how to spend that time. And I think up until now, there are a lot of really great resources these days, but up until, let's say, 5 years ago, everything about gross motor development was about the timeline. All of the resources out there were, what should I expect? And then the answers, online were, your baby should roll around 4 to 6 months and then sit around 6 months and crawl around 8 months and walk around 12 months. Good luck. And really, that was it, which is just so remarkable. So now, thankfully, we're starting to get more and more information out there about how do I make that happen? And that's the piece that I think has been missing for so long. And that's the piece I'm really passionate about. And that's really what purposeful play accomplishes is how do you help them roll and sit and crawl and walk? It's actually really easy, simple things that you can just make small little tweaks, again, with the time that you're already spending just sitting on the floor watching them, but just doing things a tiny bit differently to achieve your goal. But you do have to know what am I supposed to be looking for and what am I supposed to be working on and all of those things. I think, Instagram, for example, has provided a really great way for some of that information to get out there, but now it's about giving moms all of that information in one easy place because nobody has time to spend hours scrolling through, all of these 1 minute reels. And then you're not really getting the context around that information. So that's really with my latest online program that I released, that was really the purpose of that. It's called the Baby Blueprint. And it's really about getting the information from somewhere you can trust. It's all in one place from newborn through walking, exactly how to play with your baby in a way that achieves all of those things.
Yeah, I love that. And the justification, like the rationale, why it works, why you need to do it that way.
Right, right. Why this order matters. What
Right.
lens can you be kind of just looking at this through in terms of what's important to pay attention to and how to know if maybe you would benefit from a little bit of one-on-one help from a PT. The majority of babies don't necessarily need that one-on-one PT, but I think every single mom needs that resource
Oh,
of,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I think so just looking at different cultures and through different generations, I feel like this is some generational wisdom that we've lost through the centuries.
Mm,
You know, I,
yes,
I feel like with modern society and most women working, we've lost that innate ability to play with kids to develop their nervous system. So,
I definitely agree with that. I think that I have noticed over the years that developmental delays and things like that have become more and more common. And it's hard to point to exactly the reasons. I think that sleeping on their backs made a big difference. I think that the increase in acid reflux and wherever that's coming from has definitely made a difference. But I think exactly what you said is another huge one, which is just having the time and the space to sit and then notice those things, and then having the tribe, right? It all comes back together, having the tribe to then say, hey, does your baby do this?
yeah,
You know? And
exactly.
that's not so common anymore.
It's not. Yeah. And moms always, if in their gut they're like, oh, something's off a little bit. I don't know. Even if they're first time moms, like they're usually right. So
I
having,
100% agree. They
yeah,
are usually spot on. I 100% agree.
yeah, having those resources is absolutely critical. Piggybacking on, you mentioned, milestones and how they're becoming, the developmental delays are becoming more common. We know that COVID has kind of shifted those milestones a little bit. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed like different ages with different milestones or anything like that?
So I think that that goes along with kind of all of those environmental and situational factors that we were kind of just talking about. Stress, maybe, has been up or was up for a period of time during then, like we discussed. Not having that tribe, et cetera, et cetera. I think babies haven't changed and physiology hasn't changed, right? And so one of my favorite things to really remind everyone of is infant gross motor development is actually very clear and consistent and predictable. And maybe there's a 2 month, window of each thing. But beyond that 2 month window of time, the way that these movements look, the way that they're expected to look, the order in which they all happen, it's so predictable. It's really clockwork. And we have so much understanding of how that process goes. And it is very consistent. Idea that everything happens on its own time and all babies are different and they'll do it when they're ready and all of those types of sayings are really a much more recent cultural and situational phenomenon that I think have muddied those waters because the truth is it's not a big confusing scary thing. Like we actually know exactly what happens and what should happen and what needs to happen and how it happens. So if you can find that person again to just guide you through that process so that we can kind of get back to that understanding, that's what I would really love to see.
That's so true. Babies have not changed. Just like they say, with diet and nutrition, our guts haven't changed for thousands of years. It's the environment around us. So that's a great point. Yep. So I want to shift gears a little bit more, talk about moms. So for me, I can relate because my first was a C-section, my second was a VBAC, and I did pelvic floor therapy with her, and that was life-changing. And now pelvic floor therapy is becoming more of a thing that we talk about. It's not so taboo. The interesting thing, like you started out saying, when moms laugh or, do jump or anything like that, peeing isn't normal. One of my biggest frustrations with my older patients is balance. And there's some studies that show as we get older, the biggest cause of fractures are those getting up to go to the bathroom because they have urinary incontinence. So this all comes full circle about pelvic floor
Absolutely.
health. So talk to me about your experiences with addressing moms.
Yeah, it's really the best group of people I think that anyone can work with. They've been through so much, right? It's just something that can't be said enough. Pregnancy and childbirth is, I'm going to say, traumatic, like at least to the body. And anybody who, undergoes an ACL injury or a hip replacement or a knee replacement or any of these things gets therapy, gets care, gets follow up, et cetera, et cetera. And I would challenge that childbirth deserves the same. So it's really one of my, there's nothing more fulfilling than like providing that service, I would say, first and foremost. And my other favorite thing is that so many of these issues, such as the urinary incontinence, are actually often very easy to address, which is just so exciting. Of course, there are always going to be complicated cases and things like that. But for a huge majority of women who are having just basic stress urinary incontinence, when they leak from jumping, sneezing, laughing, coughing, etc., is often such an easy problem to fix. And like you mentioned, if we don't address it, it does have the capacity to snowball into other things. So a really common example, the falling is one. Another one is just moms feeling less confident even going to the gym or going to gym classes that are of an equal intensity, right? They choose lower impact exercise.
That's a great point.
And if you really kind of draw that line out of what that does to our cardiovascular health and our bone strength and our muscular strength and all of these things throughout the rest of our life, it's so interesting to really think about it that way. So, can we encourage moms to spend 6 to 8 weeks in addressing this problem now so that they can maintain the rest of their health and their lifespan and their health span, the quality of their life, for so many more years, I just think is huge.
That's a great point. And a lot of my moms say, I'm gonna add one more dimension to this, that post baby, their relationship kind of tanks with whoever they're with. Yeah, you have a baby that's crying that gets fed every couple of hours, but with tearing and going through everything that your body did, sex can be painful or uncomfortable. So that getting some pelvic floor therapy 6 to 8 weeks, right, can speak volumes for relationships and emotional health too, right?
Yes, 100%. That's exactly spot on. And when people really sit and think about that, like the value of that, the health of that relationship, the intimacy of that relationship, when you feel confident in your body to be able to then be open to that intimacy, I think is priceless. So it really, I hear a lot on the internet about pelvic health or pelvic physical therapy is sometimes not so accessible. And I think that there is something to that. A lot of pelvic providers are cash based these days. And I think we will see, a lot of changes over the next several years, depending on what happens with insurances. And at the same time, I think that when we really piece out the value, like we are right now, of the health of your marriage, potentially of your cardiovascular health, of your fracture risk, of your balance into old age, I really think that if we can prioritize that, like there's really nothing more valuable.
Yeah, prevention, right? Prevention's key.
Right. And it's the same with the babies, when we talk about kind of these babies who are typically developing, who don't necessarily require any one-on-one physical therapy, but if we can just provide that education that provides that prevention, what's going to happen with their back and knee pain later in life? What's going to happen to scoliosis rates? I used to work at a children's hospital where I worked with all of the children who had spinal fusions for scoliosis. And there still is no clear understanding of why scoliosis happens. But these days, when we look at all of these babies who like to turn their head in one direction and have all of these directional preferences, and I'm sure you see that a ton as a chiropractor as well, these head tilts and all of those things, to me, what could we do to the world of scoliosis if we started addressing these things now? All of that good stuff. The list is endless.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's huge. It's physics, right? Good foundation
Right.
from the start has effects later on. You would know this more than me. This is something I have always wondered, but I haven't looked up yet. So I've had, throughout the years, patients have had helmets for their kiddos, right?
Hmm.
And to me, I'm like, that's not normal. Like other cultures don't use helmets. They don't have flat spots for their babies. So can you elaborate on that, on your thoughts with that?
Yes, 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 yes. So the use of helmets has increased over the past several years. I think if we're theorizing, because again, I'm not familiar with any clear research that they've done on this yet, one of the biggest culprits has to be the back to sleep movement. And on one hand, if sleeping on their backs has really decreased the rate of SID, then we can call that worth it. I can't speak to, those statistics honestly off the top of my head, but the back to sleep movement really made those flat spots skyrocket. I think acid reflux has really made those flat spots skyrocket because kiddos with acid reflux tend to be uncomfortable in tummy time. They tend to lack rotational movements in their body, so they don't roll as much. And then they are stuck on their back. And the other piece is they end up in things like the baby Bjorn and other containers like that, those bouncers, because they're told you have to keep your baby upright. And parents can't be expected to hold their baby for, up to an hour after they eat. So they put them in these containers, and that really plays a role. So for all of those reasons, acid reflux really has increased and therefore has, I think, caused helmets to increase. And I think our lifestyle is probably the third environmental and situational factor that I would point to, just in terms of how much time we're spending in car seats and other things like that, kind of just strollers, etc. So on one hand, I think that helmets should be utilized when necessary. I think that if your baby does have a flat head spot, a helmet is a great tool to help address that. And so I would love for the stigma of helmets to decrease because a lot of babies really benefit from them. And I don't think we have a clear understanding of what those flat head spots do in terms of, let's say, TMJ dysfunction or other issues like that. So I do think that those flat head spots should be addressed. And on the other hand, could we be doing things to decrease the need for them? That would be things like addressing acid reflux, addressing kind of what our lifestyle and our schedule looks like. The back to sleep movement, we're kind of hands are tied at this point until that rule changes, but things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. I know, like for my kids, one thing that helped me as a mom was the little owl sock. Just
Mm-hmm.
having that panic, like, oh my gosh, I don't want my baby to stop breathing, right? Because they scare you as a new mom. And they pretty fast, I'd say by like 3 months, flipped over on their little bellies with their head turned and their butt up in the air. And so then I started looking at different cultures on how their babies sleep. They all sleep like that.
Yes,
Or they sleep on moms for who knows how long. So it's interesting to me. And I would agree. I think helmets do have a time and a place. But again, can we prevent it? Are there certain things?
exactly. And it's no coincidence that babies usually start sleeping so much better once they start sleeping
Oh,
on their bellies.
yeah.
Physiologically, that pressure to the front of our bodies is very soothing and calming. So there's a real reason for that. And so, yeah, who knows what will happen in terms of the guidelines for sleep, but
Yeah, that is true. I think there's a lot of like neurophysiological side effects with the flatheads, digestive physiological effects from acid reflux, which will add up as they get older.
exactly, it all becomes a little bit of a snowball.
Yeah. So you mentioned, kind of removing the stigma with helmets. How do you work around moms who have maybe a stigma with pelvic floor therapy? Because a lot of women do, right? How do you address
Yeah.
that?
I think we meet people where they're at. So I think education and education on what it includes and what it can help with and all of the benefits of it is the first step. And then I think meeting them where they're at in terms of clients who are not necessarily comfortable with internal vaginal exams. No problem. Let's do as much as we can externally. Let's see how far we can get. And I have so many clients who have full resolution of symptoms who opt out of internal pelvic exams.
Oh,
So it's still possible. And then every once in a while, if we're a couple months down the road and we're still, missing a little piece, we can always have that discussion again and see if that's something that we're ready to try. If you're going to the OB and you're having those pelvic exams, an internal vaginal exam from a pelvic floor physical therapist is way less traumatic. So I'll just say that there's no speculum involved. There's nobody sitting at your feet just staring straight up between your legs. There's no paper gowns. There's no paper under your butt. It's so much easier. So if you can do that exam, then a pelvic floor exam is really, from a pelvic floor rehab specialist, is really a walk in the park. And I think, again, a lot of people just wouldn't know that. So just talking about it more really is the biggest thing, and meeting people where they're at.
yeah. Really kind of like having that human perspective, like your clothes are on, you're educated, someone's not down there.
Right? Because I get it. Nobody loves to do, those annual OB exams. And at the same time, we do it because we understand the benefits.
Yes.
So it's really just reframing it that way and really educating people on the expertise of pelvic floor physical therapists in terms of, I think there's still a disconnect in terms of people understanding that expertise. I think a lot of times online, I'll see comments like, well, you're not a doctor, so why are, even talking about this? My doctor said that this was fine, so it must be fine, et cetera, et cetera. And I think really understanding that when an OBGYN does identify any of those things, prolapse, diastasis, incontinence, et cetera, they refer out to pelvic PT to evaluate and treat those problems. They don't treat those problems. So really kind of shifting that value that we put towards pelvic physical therapists when we're talking about these conditions, we are the experts in those things. And so, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always think too, that stigma or a lack of respect really will kind of dissipate as more, and I hate this, but as insurances accept coverage. I noticed that with acupuncture, with chiropractic, with PT, and now pelvic PTs come along there. So I think that will help a little bit too with people that are more medically minded. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if insurances were a little bit, easier to work with in terms of getting coverage for those things, it would make pelvic PT more accessible to people. And then therefore, I think the word gets spread more quickly as more people experience it. So that accessibility factor really helps to make it become more mainstream and therefore less stigmatized. I hope that things change with insurances because it really, I go into a client now and one day we'll really focus on pelvic floor work, and that can look like 20 different things. So whatever that means. And then the next day I come in and, they're really having really bad neck pain. And for that client, their priority that day happens to be their neck pain. So my ability, because I am cash based, to shift gears for that week to cater to my client as a human instead of as a diagnosis and address what their priority is that day while still, having their pelvic program going on in the background. And okay, I still want you working on this, as your home program, and we'll go back to it next week, et cetera, et cetera. That's huge.
yeah, I love that. Your hands aren't tied by insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all diagnosis driven. Have you noticed and I see this quite a bit in practice, with women that have had hysterectomies, do you notice that they do well with pelvic therapy? Do they seek you out? Because I feel like that's a sector of women, we think having a baby is one thing,
Mm-hmm.
but post-hist, a lot of people aren't talking about that.
100%. It's another really big population that benefits so strongly from pelvic physical therapy. And it's remarkable in the physician world how much it's downplayed in terms of, oh, you're losing a whole organ out of your body. No big deal. You'll heal in a few weeks and you'll go back to your regular life and you're fine. And it really is just like when we sit and think about that, it's just not logical. So those patients really benefit from pelvic PT for so many different reasons. Just the the localized work, meaning the work that we can do to the abdomen and the pelvic floor, but also just the strengthening, the coordination, the movement patterns, all of those things are affected by, surgery like that. And so really helping them with that. I think the other population that often gets missed is endometriosis and interstitial cystitis and all of those types of diagnoses. All of those things really, really benefit from pelvic PT. And I've had patients who have had cramps with their period, like horrible, debilitating cramps for their whole life. And then they come to me for postpartum reasons, things that had nothing to do with their cramps, but I happened to learn that they have these issues with cramps. And we were able to address that. And all of a sudden they don't have cramps during their period anymore. And it's just like, happy accidents like that. But I wish that those clients were getting served before then, so that it didn't have to be an accident.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. That hadn't honestly crossed my mind. PCOS, endo. Do you do for infertility? Have you worked with infertility and pelvic floor?
It's not my specialty
Yeah.
specifically, but there are a lot of providers who are dipping their toes into that world.
Yeah.
There are so many factors with infertility, but
Right.
definitely addressing any of the neuromuscular, biomechanical, nervous system factors within that world, we can definitely be helpful with.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't thought about that. So,
I have a lot of clients, for example, who have such bad pain with sex that they aren't able to tolerate it, or they choose, not to, because who wants to do something that's so painful?
yeah.
And yet they want another baby or they want their first baby. And so when we talk about, you can even talk about infertility in that aspect, like you're not able to participate in the activity that would allow you to have a baby from that perspective. And so pelvic PT, allows for that sex to be comfortable and therefore, for that fertility to happen. So from that perspective, it's huge.
That's true. And I think I could be wrong on this, but I remember reading some studies where they show that if a woman orgasms, she's more likely to get pregnant. So,
Yes, a lot of
yeah,
people don't realize that pelvic PT can help with orgasms. That's such a good point.
I didn't know that. So that's new to me.
I
Yeah,
love that.
multiple benefits.
So the best benefits, like, could I be doing any more gratifying work than giving women enjoyable sex? I don't think so. I
Yeah,
don't think there's anything more rewarding.
yeah. And is it worth paying cash for? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Is your husband ever going to tell you no, that he doesn't want you to invest that money? Never.
There's
If
a
he
new
knows what,
marketing right there.
right?
That's true. So, anything that you would want to leave our listeners with any, clinical pearls or information that you'd want them to know either about their little ones with milestones or about pelvic floor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we're talking about our little ones, really knowing that if you are worried, confused, concerned in any way about your little one's milestones, and that could look like, you know, I just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing in general. I just don't know if what they're doing looks normal. I just don't know if they're delayed. I just, any of those types of questions that feel vague and feel like something you probably just have to live with. I just want them to know that they don't have to live with that, that there actually are really clear, easy, affordable, simple resources out there that provide answers to every single one of those questions. So, and there are clear answers to those questions. I think a lot of times parents think that they're there isn't an answer, that they just have to sit in that confusion and see what happens. But there really is a clear answer to, yeah, if this is what your baby's doing, this is the next thing to work on. And if this is what your baby isn't doing, these are the 3 or 4 factors that are kind of the prerequisites to be able to do that skill. And we can really do that clearly and easily, and it takes no extra time. So finding a resource like that, if you, maybe we can provide a link, but if you go to my website, I have one. I know other pelvic PTs have resources as well. Mine is called the Baby Blueprint, and it's just a really easy, affordable online course, 10, 20 minutes a day. Throw it on your phone while you're sitting on the floor playing with your baby, and just choose kind of how old your baby is and what you're working on, and practice the things. And it really, I think, can be life changing. How many, stressors can we take off of parents' plates
Right.
is really the question I ask myself every day. And I think this is a huge one that we can really easily take off of their plates. So that's what I would say in terms of the little ones. I think in terms of the moms, my message is actually very similar. There are answers, there is help, there is support for any of the things, right? And things that you might not even know. So we talked about cramps. We talked about all littler things that are not as often spoken about. There's help out there. And so if you're feeling like you're getting tossed from one physician to another without a clear goal or end game, if you feel like you don't really know if this is something that is worth addressing, just making a quick phone call. I love those quick 10-minute phone calls with people to say, hey, yeah, I can help with that. Or, hey, no, I would direct you to this person. There's no harm in that. So, really kind of feeling confident in reaching out to the professionals to ask those questions. It does become, I will say, cash providers are often the ones who are able to answer the phones, and answer those questions. So, it's not as easy to do that when a front desk person of a big hospital-based, insurance-based clinic is answering the phones. So it's something to keep in mind. And it might be one reason why a lot of moms don't do that, because they are expecting that if they make that call, they're speaking to somebody who's not the actual provider. So, just to kind of shine a light on that option, and to really shine a light on the value long term and in so many different aspects of your life, the value in treating these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything with us today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for speaking with me.
Yeah, I'll be sure to link everything and then provide some resources for our listeners.
Amazing. This is so fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.